Captain Jake Morrison walked through the crystal corridors of the Galactic Trade Council building. His black uniform looked simple next to the colorful robes and shining armor of the alien delegates. Behind him, Lieutenant Amy Brooks carried a small briefcase that would change everything. The meeting room was huge. Tall windows showed the 3 suns of Centauri Prime burning in the purple sky. Around the circular table sat representatives from dozens of alien species. At the head sat Chancellor Vexitar, a tall Zephyrian with blue skin and silver eyes that showed nothing but contempt. "So the humans finally come to beg," Vexitar said in his deep voice. The other aliens laughed. Some made clicking sounds. Others hissed. All of them thought this would be entertaining. Morrison sat down without asking permission. Brooks placed the briefcase on the table with a soft click. The room went quiet. "We're not here to beg," Morrison said. His voice was calm and steady. "We're here to collect what you owe us." More laughter filled the room. A fat hegemony representative named Quindal shook his multiple heads. "Humans think too much of themselves. What could we possibly owe such a weak species?" Brooks opened the briefcase. Inside was a single datapad. She handed it to Morrison, who activated it. Numbers appeared in the air above the table. Big numbers, very big numbers. 847 trillion credits, Morrison said. "That's what you owe humanity." The laughter stopped. Vexitar leaned forward. "Impossible. Show your work. Human." Morrison touched the datapad. The hologram changed. It showed a long list of transactions, contracts, and agreements. All ignored. All unpaid. "Let's start with the Zephyrian Empire," Morrison said. "In 2298, you asked for help terraforming your colony worlds. We gave you the technology for free. You promised to pay us later." The hologram showed green planets that had once been dead rocks. Cities with millions of Zephyrians living comfortable lives. You never paid. The bill is now 43 trillion credits, including interest. Vexitar's silver eyes narrowed. That technology was a gift between allies. "No," Brooks said, speaking for the first time. "We have the signed contracts. Your predecessor agreed to payment terms. You've ignored every invoice for 89 years. The hologram shifted to show the hegemony worlds. "During your civil war, you begged for military advisors. We sent our best strategists and weapons designers. You promised payment after victory." Quindal's face turned a darker shade of purple. "Those advisors were volunteers. Volunteers who were promised payment," Morrison replied. "Payment that never came. Your entire military doctrine is based on human tactical manuals. Your ships use human-designed weapons. The bill is 67 trillion credits." One by one, Morrison went through the list. The Rigel plague that killed billions until human doctors created a cure. The Void War, where human engineers built the defensive networks that saved half the galaxy. Technology transfers, medical supplies, infrastructure loans, educational programs, all unpaid. The aliens began to look uncomfortable. Some whispered to their aides. Others checked their own records on personal devices. "Even if these debts were real," said a thin creature with 6 arms, "humans are too scattered and weak to collect them. You have what, 50 colony worlds? We have thousands." Morrison smiled for the first time. It was not a friendly smile. "You think we're weak because we don't fight wars over resources," he said. "You think we're scattered because we don't build empires. You're wrong on both counts." He touched the datapad again. The hologram changed to show the galaxy itself. Thousands of star systems connected by trade routes and communication networks. "Look closely," Morrison said. "Really look." Red dots began appearing throughout the galaxy. Hundreds of them, then thousands. Each dot marked a human presence. Not colonies, not military bases, just humans, working, building, fixing problems. "We're not scattered," Brooks said quietly. "We're everywhere. Every space station you depend on has human engineers keeping it running. Every trade route you use was mapped by human explorers. Every computer system in this building runs on human-designed software." The alien stared at the hologram. The red dot seemed to pulse like a heartbeat throughout known space. You see us as servants, Morrison continued. Useful but unimportant. You take our help for granted. You assume we'll always be there to solve your problems and ask nothing in return. Vextar stood up, his tall frame casting a shadow across the table. Enough of this nonsense. Even if we owed you money, which we don't, there's nothing you can do about it. We outnumber you 1,000 to 1. Morrison stood as well, though he barely reached the alien's shoulder. You're right about the numbers, but you're wrong about what we can do. He walked to the window and looked out at the city below. Millions of beings going about their daily lives, all depending on systems and technology that humans had built or improved. We gave you 30 days' notice before this meeting, Morrison said without turning around. Standard galactic law for debt collection. The grace period ends tomorrow. And then what? Quindal demanded. You'll send your tiny fleet to threaten us? Morrison turned back to face them. No, then we stop working. The room was silent except for the humming of the air recyclers. Human-designed air recyclers. Brooks closed the briefcase with another soft click. Every human in the galaxy received the same message 3 hours ago. If payment negotiations don't begin within 24 hours, we implement collection protocols. What does that mean? Asked a nervous delegate from the outer rim. It means, Morrison said, heading for the door, that you're about to learn what the galaxy looks like without humans holding it together. As they reached the exit, Vextar called after them. You're making a mistake, human. We can replace you easily. Morrison paused at the doorway. No, Chancellor. You really can't. You just don't know it yet. The two humans left the room, leaving behind a table full of aliens who were beginning to realize they might have made a very expensive mistake. Outside the building, Brooks looked at her captain. Think they'll pay? Morrison checked his watch. No, they're too proud and too stupid, but that's okay. We planned for that too. As they walked back to their ship, neither human seemed worried. They had waited 200 years to collect these debts. They could wait one more day to begin teaching the galaxy the true cost of taking humanity for granted. Behind them, emergency meetings were already being called across a dozen star systems. But it was too late for easy solutions. The bill had come due. The deadline had passed. Across the galaxy, humans began to collect their debts in ways the aliens never expected. On Kepler Station, Administrator Lisa Parker sat in her small office overlooking the main reactor core. The massive fusion reactors hummed with power, providing energy for the 2 million beings who called the station home. The Zephyrians who ran the station had laughed when they received the human debt notice yesterday. They weren't laughing now. What do you mean, maintenance fees? Demanded Station Commander Krelton, his blue skin turning darker with anger. Those reactors have run perfectly for 20 years. Lisa looked up from her datapad without expression. Yes, they have. Because my team and I have been maintaining them for free. That ends today. She touched her pad, and a new display appeared on the wall. It showed every repair, every upgrade, every tiny adjustment that kept the reactors running at peak efficiency. Thousands of hours of work, all unpaid. The Galactic Trade Council refused to begin payment negotiations, Lisa continued. So we're implementing standard collection protocols. Pay what you owe or pay for services as you use them. Krelton's silver eyes went wide. You can't shut down our reactors. People will die. I'm not shutting them down, Lisa said calmly. I'm just not maintaining them for free anymore. The basic fusion reaction will continue, but without proper maintenance, your power output will drop by 60% within a week, 90% within a month. The station commander looked at the display showing the reactor's complex systems. His people understood basic reactor operation, but the humans had made thousands of small improvements over the years. Improvements that required constant attention. How much? He asked quietly. For continued maintenance. 50,000 credits per day. For the unpaid maintenance of the last 20 years, 4 billion credits. Meanwhile, 3 star systems away, engineer Sam Collins was having a similar conversation aboard the Hegemony flagship Dominator. The massive warship stretched for 5 kilometers, bristling with weapons and armor. It was the pride of the hegemony fleet. It was also drifting helplessly in space. "Fix it!" Admiral Zorketh screamed at his engineering staff. "Fix it now!" The hegemony engineers stared helplessly at their displays. Every navigation system showed the same message: payment required, human technical services. Sam Collins appeared on the bridge like he had materialized from thin air, which in a way he had. As the ship's technical advisor, he had access to every system. "Problem with the navigation?" Sam asked innocently. The Admiral spun around, his forearms waving in fury. "What did you do to my ship?" "Nothing," Sam replied. "I just stopped preventing certain security protocols from activating. Protocols that were built into the navigation systems when my people installed them 15 years ago. The truth was simple and terrifying. Humans had built or improved nearly every system on the ship. They had also included safeguards to prevent those systems from being used against human interests. Safeguards that were now active. The hegemony owes humanity 67 trillion credits, Sam continued. Make a payment and your navigation comes back online. Refuse and your flagship becomes a very expensive piece of space junk. On the Zephyrian homeworld, Dr. Kate Williams was ending her quiet career as an atmospheric specialist. For 10 years, she had worked to maintain the complex processors that kept the planet's toxic atmosphere breathable for its 15 billion inhabitants. The Zephyrians had always seen her as a useful but unimportant human. They were about to learn how wrong they were. "The atmospheric processors are showing anomalies," reported Chief Scientist Velnox at the Emergency Council meeting. "Oxygen levels are dropping slowly across the entire planet." Chancellor Vextar pounded his fist on the table. "Then fix them." "We're trying," Velnox said miserably. "But Dr. Williams disappeared this morning. Without her, we can't access the main control systems." Kate Williams had not disappeared. She was sitting in a small human embassy building, watching the Zephyrian news reports with mild interest. Her replacement, Dr. Ryan Clark, was explaining the situation to increasingly desperate alien officials. "The atmospheric processors use human-designed biofilters," Ryan said patiently. "Dr. Williams spent 10 years optimizing them for your planet's unique chemistry. Without her authorization codes, you're stuck with the basic settings." "Which means what?" demanded the Chancellor. "Which means your planet will slowly revert to its natural state. Toxic atmosphere, unbreathable air. You have maybe 6 months before it becomes a problem, a year before it becomes critical." In space, Commander Rick Hayes led a small fleet of human ships on what he called repo operations. They weren't attacking anyone, they weren't threatening anyone, they were simply taking back what belonged to humanity. The mining station at Asteroid Belt 7 had been built with human loans 20 years ago. The loans had never been repaid, so Rick's ships simply attached towing cables and began moving the station toward human space. "You can't do this," protested the station manager over the communication link. "This is theft." "No," Rick replied calmly. "This is repossession. You defaulted on your loan. The station reverts to human ownership." Similar scenes played out across 17 star systems. Orbital platforms, communication relays, mining equipment, even entire small outposts. All built with human money, materials, or expertise. All quietly being reclaimed. The aliens tried to resist, but they faced a problem they had never expected. Most of their mercenary forces refused to fight humans. Captain Nina Torres had built her reputation as one of the galaxy's most feared mercenary leaders. Her mixed-species crew could handle any job, any target. But when the hegemony offered her a fortune to attack human repo ships, she just laughed. "Are you insane?" she asked the hegemony representative. "You want me to fight the people who taught me everything I know about space combat?" It was true. Nina had learned fleet tactics from human advisors during the border wars. Her ship's weapons systems were based on human designs. Her crew included 6 human technical specialists who kept everything running. "Besides," she added, "humans are the best customers in the galaxy. They pay their bills on time, treat their hired help with respect, and never ask you to do anything stupid." Why would I bite the hand that feeds me? Across the galaxy, the pattern repeated. Alien commanders discovered that their most trusted advisors were human, their most reliable contractors were human, their most skilled technical staff were human, and all of them had just stopped working for free. The economic impact was immediate and devastating. Trade routes that depended on human-maintained navigation beacons went dark. Manufacturing plants with human-designed automation systems slowed to a crawl. Even simple things like waste recycling and water purification began to fail as human technicians quietly walked away from their posts. By the end of the first day, 17 major stock markets had lost 20% of their value. By the end of the week, 3 alien governments had declared economic emergencies. The Galactic Trade Council called emergency sessions, but they faced a problem. Half their communication networks depended on human-maintained systems. The other half were designed by humans and required human-made components for repairs. Chancellor Vextar stood before his council, looking older than his 150 years. How did we not see this coming? His aide, a nervous young Zephyrian named Kickstall, consulted his datapad. According to our analysis, humans have been involved in 93% of all major infrastructure projects in the last century. They've trained 70% of our technical specialists. They've provided critical components for virtually every advanced system we use. And we never paid them? We thought they were happy to help. They never complained. They never demanded payment up front. They just worked. Vextar stared out at his capital city. Already, some buildings were experiencing power fluctuations as the human-maintained grid began to develop problems. They were building a trap, he realized. For 200 years they were building a trap, and we walked right into it. The humans, meanwhile, seemed remarkably calm about the whole situation. They continued to maintain critical life support systems. They didn't let anyone die. They just stopped doing anything extra, anything that made life comfortable instead of merely survivable. It was a masterpiece of patient planning, and it was only the beginning. The aliens thought they could solve their human problem with force. They were about to learn why that was a mistake. Colonel Danny Rodriguez had been serving as a military advisor with the Hegemony 3rd Fleet for 8 years. The aliens thought he was just another hired human, useful for his tactical knowledge but ultimately disposable. They had no idea he was part of a network that spanned every major military force in the galaxy. "Attention all ships," Admiral Zorketh announced over the fleet communication system. "We are moving to secure human assets in this sector. Any human personnel who resist will be detained." Danny smiled as he sat at his console on the flagship's bridge. Around him, dozens of alien officers prepared for what they thought would be an easy operation. They were about to get a very unpleasant surprise. "Admiral," Danny said quietly, "I need to show you something." Before Zorketh could respond, Danny activated a special code on his console. Throughout the fleet, warning lights began flashing on every ship. System after system went offline. "What's happening?" the Admiral demanded. "Your ships are experiencing cascading system failures," Danny explained calmly. "Weapons offline, engines running at minimum power, communications limited to short range. Only." The Admiral's forearms waved frantically as he tried to understand what was happening. "How is this possible?" "Simple," Danny replied. "Every ship in your fleet was either built in human shipyards or upgraded with human technology. We installed what you might call insurance policies in all our work." It was true. For decades, human engineers had been the galaxy's go-to experts for military technology. They had built engines, weapon systems, shields, and computer networks for dozens of alien fleets. And in every single installation, they had included hidden subroutines that could be activated remotely. "But that's sabotage," Zorketh protested. "No," Danny said patiently. "That's a security feature. It prevents our technology from being used against us. Standard practice in human engineering." Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. In the Zephyrian Navy, Commander Beth Nelson activated shutdown codes that left their newest battleships floating helplessly in space. On Rigel Station, Engineer Mike Davis caused the orbital defense platforms to enter maintenance mode, leaving them unable to target anything. The aliens had depended on human expertise for so long that they had forgotten how to maintain their own military systems. Without human technical support, their mighty fleets became expensive collections of scrap metal. But the real surprise came from an unexpected source. Captain Nina Torres had been building her reputation as a pirate for 15 years. Her fleet, known as the Void Hunters, was feared throughout the Outer Rim systems. What most people didn't know was that Nina had been working for human intelligence the entire time. "Attention, Zephyrian Convoy Alpha 7. Nina's voice crackled over the communication channels. "This is Captain Torres of the Void Hunters. You are carrying cargo that belongs to humanity. Prepare to be boarded." The convoy commander, a nervous Zephyrian named Peltok, stared at his sensors in disbelief. 15 heavily armed ships had just dropped out of hyperspace around his cargo fleet. Ships that should have been attacking random targets, not enforcing debt collection. "Captain Torres," Peltok transmitted, "surely we can reach an agreement. The Void Hunters have never worked for any government." "You're right," Nina replied. "We don't work for governments, but we do work for people who pay their bills. And right now, that means we work for humanity." It was a revelation that shocked the entire galaxy. The most notorious pirate fleet in known space was actually a human intelligence operation. For years, they had been mapping alien shipping routes, identifying critical supply lines, and building relationships with criminal organizations throughout the Rim. "You see," Nina continued as her ships moved to surround the convoy, "humans have been playing a very long game. While you were busy thinking of us as servants and advisors, we were learning everything about how your civilizations really work." The industrial world of manufactured, factory supervisor Carl Mason was implementing what he called efficiency improvements. The planet's automated manufacturing systems had been producing weapons and equipment for the hegemony military for decades, all under human supervision. "I don't understand," said plant manager Korstall as he stared at the production reports. "Output has dropped to 30% of normal levels. What's wrong with the machines?" Carl consulted his datapad with a straight face. "Nothing's wrong. I'm just following proper safety protocols. You know, the ones your people wrote but never actually implemented." It was beautiful in its simplicity. Alien safety regulations were notoriously complex and contradictory. They had been written by committees who had never set foot on a factory floor. Humans had been quietly ignoring the stupid rules for years to keep production running smoothly. Now, they were following every regulation exactly as written. "According to Hegemony Safety Code 34E7B, Carl continued, "all manufacturing equipment must be shut down for safety inspection every 4 hours. Code 891C requires that any component showing where greater than 0.2% must be replaced immediately. Code 12005A mandates that no worker can operate machinery for more than 2 hours without a full medical evaluation." The factory ground to a halt as Carl's human technicians began implementing every safety rule simultaneously. The alien workers tried to continue production, but they had never been trained to operate without human guidance. Similar slowdowns occurred across hundreds of worlds. Humans didn't quit their jobs or sabotage equipment. They simply started following alien rules instead of using common sense. The economic impact was immediate and crushing. Meanwhile, Admiral Beth Nelson was having the most important conversation of her career. As the senior human liaison with the Galactic Defense Force, she had spent years building relationships with alien officers. Now those relationships were being put to the test. "You can't be serious," said General Vaktul, the GDF's supreme commander. "You expect us to arrest our own advisors?" Beth looked around the conference room at the dozen alien commanders who made up the GDF leadership. She had worked with all of them, trained some of them, saved the lives of others during various conflicts. "I'm not asking you to arrest anyone," she said calmly. "I'm just informing you that human military advisors are being recalled to Earth, effective immediately." "But that would leave us blind," protested Admiral Kesrith of the Centauri fleet. "Half our tactical doctrine came from human advisors. Our communication protocols, our logistics systems, our training programs, all developed with human input." "Yes," Beth agreed. It would be quite a problem for you. The silence stretched for long minutes as the alien commanders contemplated the magnitude of the crisis. The Galactic Defense Force had been built around human expertise. Without human advisors, they would be reduced to a collection of individual fleets with no common training or communication standards. "What do you want?" General Vaktul asked. "Finally." "Recognition," Beth replied simply. "For 2 centuries, humans have been the backbone of galactic civilization. We've built your infrastructure, trained your people, and solved your problems, and we've been treated like hired help." She stood and walked to the window overlooking the GDF headquarters. Below, thousands of beings from dozens of species worked together to maintain peace across the galaxy. Most of them didn't realize how much they depended on human knowledge and expertise. "We don't want to rule the galaxy," Beth continued. "We don't want to conquer anyone or destroy anything. We just want to be paid for our work and treated as equal partners instead of useful servants." "And if we refuse?" asked Admiral Kesrith. Beth turned back to face them. "Then you'll discover what the galaxy looks like without humans holding it together. Your fleets will lose cohesion. Your trade networks will collapse. Your colonies will struggle to maintain basic life support." "You're threatening us," General Vaktul accused. "No," Beth said quietly. "I'm explaining the consequences of taking us for granted for so long. You built your entire civilization on human labor and expertise. Now you have to decide whether you want to keep that foundation or try to build a new one." As news of the human actions spread, panic began to set in. Across the galaxy, stock markets crashed as investors realized how dependent their economies were on human workers. Military commanders discovered that their forces couldn't function without human advisors. Government officials found that their own bureaucracies relied on human-designed computer systems. The aliens had thought humans were weak because they avoided conflict. They had mistaken patience for passivity and cooperation for subservience. They were learning the difference between someone who couldn't fight and someone who chose not to fight, and they were discovering that the second type was far more dangerous than the first. The galaxy was about to receive a very expensive education in the true cost of human partnership. The aliens thought they could force humanity to back down through legislation and financial pressure. They were about to learn that 2 can play that game, and humans had been playing it longer. The emergency session of the Galactic Trade Council was unlike anything in the organization's history. Representatives from every major species had gathered to address what they called the human crisis. Their solution was simple: declare all human debts void and freeze all human assets. Chancellor Vextar stood before the assembly with what he thought was a winning proposal. "The humans have shown their true nature," he declared. "They are parasites who have infiltrated our civilizations to weaken us from within. We must act decisively." The vote was swift and decisive. By a margin of 47-3, the Council declared human debt claims legally invalid due to cultural incompatibility and authorized the seizure of all human-owned assets within Council jurisdiction. They thought they had won. They were wrong. Fleet Admiral Pete Johnson received the news while standing on the bridge of the Earth defense ship Liberty. Around him, the largest human fleet ever assembled hung motionless in space near the Galactic Trade Hub, the most important hyperspace junction in known space. "Admiral," reported his communications officer, Lieutenant Steve Parker, "the Trade Council has just frozen all human assets and declared our debt claims void." Pete nodded calmly. He had expected this. In fact, he had been counting on it. "Send the message," he ordered. Throughout the galaxy, every human ship received the same transmission simultaneously. The message was simple. "Protocol 7 is now active. Begin safety inspections immediately." What happened next would be remembered as the day the galaxy stopped moving. At the Rigel Junction, Captain Susan Davis positioned her small squadron directly in the path of the main shipping lane. When the first alien cargo hauler approached, she transmitted a polite message. "Attention cargo vessel Prophet's Dream. This is Captain Davis of the Earth Defense Force. Please prepare for mandatory safety inspection of your hyperspace drive." The Alien captain, a hegemony trader named Bechtold, was confused. "What authority do you have to inspect my ship?" "Under Galactic Safety Code 2847A, Susan replied, "any vessel using human-designed hyperspace technology must submit to inspection by qualified human engineers before entering hyperspace lanes." Bechtold checked his ship's specifications and felt his heart sink. Like virtually every ship in the galaxy, his vessel used human-designed jump drives. The technology was so common that most people had forgotten who invented it. "How long will this inspection take?" he asked nervously. "Standard procedure requires a full 72-hour evaluation," Susan replied cheerfully. "We'll need to examine every component, test every safety system, and verify that all modifications meet human engineering standards." Similar scenes played out at every major hyperspace junction in the galaxy. Human ships, following ancient safety regulations that had been ignored for decades, began conducting detailed inspections of every vessel that wanted to use the jump lanes. Since humans had designed the hyperspace technology that made galactic civilization possible, they were the only ones qualified to conduct the inspections. And suddenly they were taking their time to do things properly. Galactic commerce ground to a halt within hours. But Admiral Johnson wasn't finished. He had spent 30 years studying alien weaknesses, and he knew exactly where to apply pressure for maximum effect. Financial analyst Maria Rodriguez had been working quietly in the Centauri Banking Consortium for 15 years. The aliens thought she was just another human accountant, useful for her attention to detail, but ultimately unimportant. They were about to discover that Maria had been building something much more significant than spreadsheets. "Ladies and gentlemen," Maria announced to the emergency meeting of the consortium's board, "I have some disturbing news about the stability of your currency." The board members, representatives of the galaxy's most powerful financial institutions, looked at her with growing alarm as she activated her presentation. "For the past decade, I've been analyzing the economic foundations of your major currencies. What I've discovered is that they depend entirely on the continued operation of human-maintained infrastructure." The holographic display showed the complex web of trade routes, manufacturing centers, and resource extraction operations that supported galactic commerce. Red indicators marked every location where humans provided critical services. "If human workers were to withdraw from these positions," Maria continued, "your economies would collapse within weeks. The Zephyrian credit is backed by manufacturing output from human-supervised factories. The hegemony standard depends on resource extraction using human-designed equipment. Even your banking networks run on human-built computer systems." Board Chairman Luxerol, an elderly Centauri with silver skin, stared at the display in horror. "Are you threatening us?" "No," Maria replied calmly. "I'm informing you. The Trade Council just declared human debt claims invalid and froze our assets. That means humans no longer have any financial stake in maintaining your economic stability." She touched her control pad, and new numbers appeared. Stock prices dropping, currency values plummeting, investment portfolios losing value by the minute. "The market has already begun to react," Maria explained. "Investors are realizing that your stable economies were never actually stable. They were dependent on the goodwill of a species you just declared to be parasites. By the end of the day, 3 major stock markets had crashed completely. The Zephyrian credit lost 60% of its value. The hegemony standard was no longer accepted for interstellar transactions. Meanwhile, Dr. Alex Thompson was implementing what he called quality assurance measures at human technical installations throughout the galaxy. As the Director of Human Technical Services, Alex had oversight of nearly 1 million human workers spread across thousands of worlds, workers who maintained everything from planetary atmospheres to interstellar communication networks. "Attention all human technical personnel," Alex transmitted on the emergency frequency. "Effective immediately, we are implementing strict compliance with all alien safety and regulatory standards." The message was clear. No more cutting corners to keep alien systems running smoothly. On Kepler Station, engineer Frank Lewis began following Zephyrian electrical codes exactly as written. The codes, required that any power conduit showing signs of wear be completely replaced rather than repaired. Since the codes had been written by bureaucrats who had never seen a power conduit, they defined signs of wear as any discoloration, scratching, or surface irregularity. Within hours, Frank had identified 17,000 power conduits that needed replacement. According to the regulations, they all had to be shut down immediately pending replacement. The station's power output dropped by 70%. "You can't shut down our power grid," protested Station Commander Krelton. "I'm not shutting it down," Frank replied patiently. "I'm following your safety codes. Would you prefer that I ignore Zephyrian law?" Similar scenes played out across hundreds of worlds. Human technicians stopped using their judgment and experience to keep alien systems running efficiently. Instead, they followed alien regulations exactly as written. The results were catastrophic. On the hegemony world of Industry Prime, production fell to 15% of normal levels, as human supervisors began requiring the safety inspections that alien regulations mandated but had never actually implemented. On the research station at Tau Ceti, human scientists stopped sharing their knowledge freely and began charging consultation fees for every question. On the colony world of New Rigel, human doctors continued treating emergency cases, but stopped providing routine medical care until payment arrangements were made. The beautiful irony was that humans weren't breaking any laws or violating any contracts. They were simply following alien rules instead of using the common sense and flexibility that had kept galactic civilization running smoothly. Chancellor Vextar stood in his office, staring out at his capital city. Half the buildings were experiencing power problems. Traffic control systems were failing as human-maintained networks went into compliance mode. Even the weather control satellites were acting up as human technicians stopped making the tiny adjustments that kept them working properly. "How long until we can replace the humans?" he asked his aide. Kickstall consulted his datapad with a miserable expression. "Our best estimate is 15 to 20 years to train replacement technical staff. That assumes we can find people smart enough to understand the systems and willing to work in dangerous conditions for low pay. And if we don't replace them, then our civilization slowly degrades back to pre-contact technology levels." Vextar closed his eyes. The humans had been patient for 2 centuries, accepting poor treatment and delayed payment because they believed in cooperation and mutual benefit. But patience had limits, and the aliens had finally found them. "What do they want?" he asked quietly. "Respect," Kickstall replied, "and payment for 200 years of unpaid work." Outside the window, another building went dark as its human-maintained power systems entered safety mode. The galaxy was learning that there was a difference between someone who chose to help and someone who could be forced to help. The alien delegates arrived at Earth not as conquerors or negotiators, but as desperate beings seeking mercy from a species they had finally learned to respect. President Julia Kim stood at the window of her office in the United Nations building, in New Geneva, watching the alien ships descend through Earth's atmosphere. Each vessel carried representatives from species that had scorned humanity for centuries. Now they came as supplicants, begging for a chance to rebuild what their arrogance had destroyed. The view outside showed a world that told the story of human resilience. Ancient impact craters marked where asteroids had tried to end life on Earth. Mountain ranges pushed up by geological violence stood beside valleys carved by glaciers that had covered half the planet in ice. Volcanic plains stretched across regions that had once been molten hellscapes. And through it all, life had not just survived but thrived. "Madam President," announced Secretary of State John Carter, "the delegations are assembled in the main chamber." Julia nodded and walked toward the meeting that would reshape galactic civilization. Behind her, the scarred but beautiful face of humanity's homeworld served as a reminder of what humans could endure and overcome. The main assembly hall had been arranged simply. A single table with chairs for the alien delegates, no weapons, no guards, no displays of military might. Just humans and aliens sitting across from each other to finally have an honest conversation. Chancellor Vextar looked older than his years as he took his seat. The proud Zephyrian leader who had laughed at human debt claims 3 weeks ago now bore the weight of a civilization in crisis. Around him sat the other representatives. Admiral Kesserith of the Centauri fleet, Minister Cordal of the Hegemony Trade Council, and delegates from 24 other species. All of them had the same expression, defeated but hopeful. "Madam President," Vextar began, his voice lacking its former arrogance, "we come to discuss terms for the restoration of normal relations between our peoples." Julia took her seat across from them. No staff, no advisors, just her and the data pad containing humanity's final offer. "Before we discuss terms," she said quietly, "I want you to understand something. What you've experienced over the past 3 weeks isn't human cruelty or revenge. It's what the galaxy looks like when humans work exactly as hard as they're paid to work." She activated the data pad, and holographic displays filled the air above the table. Charts showing the collapse of interstellar commerce. Graphs depicting the economic damage caused by humans simply following alien regulations. Images of space stations struggling to maintain basic life support without human expertise. "For 200 years, Julia continued, humans have been subsidizing galactic civilization with free labor, free expertise, and free goodwill. We fixed your problems, maintained your systems, and asked for nothing more than fair payment and basic respect." Admiral Kesserith leaned forward. "We didn't realize how dependent we had become." "You didn't want to realize it," Julia corrected, gently. "It was more comfortable to think of humans as useful servants rather than essential partners." The truth hung in the air like a physical presence. Every alien in the room had taken human contributions for granted. They had assumed that humans would always be there to solve problems and keep systems running, regardless of how they were treated. "What are your terms?" asked Minister Cordal, his multiple voices speaking in harmony. Julia touched the data pad again. New numbers appeared, not the crushing debt figures from 3 weeks ago, but something different. The total debt of 847 trillion credits will be restructured over 500 years at 3% interest. Payments will begin immediately, but will be scaled according to each species' ability to pay. The aliens looked confused. They had expected harsh terms, punitive interest rates, perhaps demands for territory or resources. "That's reasonable," Vextar said cautiously. "Humanity isn't interested in crushing anyone," Julia explained. "We want partnership, not domination. But that partnership has to be based on mutual respect and fair compensation." She activated another section of the proposal. "All future human technical services will be provided under standard commercial contracts. No more free maintenance. No more unpaid consulting. No more assuming that humans will work out of the goodness of their hearts." The economic implications were staggering but fair. Aliens would have to budget for human expertise instead of taking it for granted. They would have to plan for maintenance costs instead of assuming systems would run perfectly forever. "The Galactic Trade Council will be restructured," Julia continued, "with human representation proportional to our actual contribution to galactic commerce, which our analysis shows is approximately 37%. This meant humans would go from having no vote in galactic affairs to controlling more than a third of all decisions. It was a massive shift in political power, but one that reflected economic reality. "Finally," Julia said, "we want formal recognition of humanity's role in galactic civilization. No more treating humans as hired help or useful aliens. We want equal status as a founding member of galactic society." The silence stretched for long minutes as the aliens considered the terms. They were fair, but would fundamentally change the balance of power in the galaxy. "And if we refuse?" asked a nervous delegate from the outer rim. Julia's expression didn't change. "Then humans will continue working exactly as hard as we're paid to work, which means galactic civilization will slowly collapse back to pre-contact technology levels." It wasn't a threat. It was a simple statement of fact. The galaxy had become so dependent on human expertise that it literally could not function without human cooperation. "We accept," Vextar said quietly. "All of you?" Julia asked, looking around the table. One by one, the alien delegates nodded their agreement. Some looked relieved, others looked resigned. All of them understood that they had no real choice. Then, "Let's discuss implementation," Julia said. The next several hours were spent working out the practical details of humanity's new role in galactic affairs. Human technical workers would return to their positions but under new contracts that respected their expertise and compensated them fairly. Human advisors would resume their roles with alien military forces, but as equals rather than subordinates. The most important change was psychological. Humans would no longer be the galaxy's invisible servants, maintaining civilization from the shadows while others took credit for their work. As the meeting concluded, Vextar approached Julia privately. "May I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you wait so long? You could have demanded fair treatment decades ago." Julia looked out the window at Earth's scarred but thriving landscape. "Because we hoped you would choose to do the right thing on your own. We gave you every chance to be honorable partners instead of selfish users. And when we failed that test? Then we taught you the true cost of taking us for granted." Julia's voice was calm but firm. "Humans don't start fights, Chancellor. But we do finish them." As the alien delegates prepared to return to their ships, they carried with them a new understanding of humanity. Humans weren't weak because they avoided conflict. They weren't servants because they helped others. They were a species that had survived ice ages, asteroid impacts, and supervolcanic eruptions by learning to work together and solve problems. And they had applied those same skills to galactic civilization, building the infrastructure and systems that everyone else depended on. The galaxy had learned to fear humans, but not because they were violent or cruel. They feared humans because humans were competent, patient, and absolutely determined to protect what was theirs. Captain Jake Morrison, who had started this whole crisis with a simple briefcase full of unpaid bills, stood beside President Kim as the alien ships departed. "Think they learned their lesson?" he asked. Julia smiled as she watched the ships disappear into the star-filled sky. "They learned that respect isn't something you can take for granted, and that the quiet person in the corner might be the most important person in the room." Below them, Earth continued its ancient dance around the sun, carrying a species that had turned their greatest weakness, their need to cooperate and build together, into their greatest strength. The galaxy would never underestimate humanity again, and humans would never again accept less than they deserved for keeping civilization running. The debt had been collected, the terms had been set, and the galaxy had learned that some lessons are worth whatever they cost to teach.